is usually based at the DTU in Copenhagen and at SODAS, the Data Analytics, Social Data Analysis Center in Copenhagen, but he's currently at Tåsinge, I believe it is, in a cottage somewhere at Tåsinge. So Sune will give some overview into what is it that HOPE is trying to do on the behavioral data side. And Rebekah will also fill in on the very first look at what do we know from the social media data. So that's what we'll hear from the HOPE project. We will also be hearing from a couple of new initiatives that started up, but I'll introduce them as we move along. So maybe Sune, the best place to start would be to pass on the mic to you and tell a little bit about what can be done in the HOPE project in terms of behavioral tracking and all the different things that are available there, and what are the potential complications and issues that we need to think of when we open for this kind of large-scale behavioral monitoring. So Sune,
yes. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, so the short answer is we don't know yet with in terms of any of what you're saying, right? So I'm also part of the, through my sort of with my DTU cap on, part of the response from the Serum Institute. So what I'm doing right now in the HOPE project is kind of working on the parts that are overlapping. And so at the Serum Institute, what they want to do is model the epidemic to understand what happens to the predictions as a function of how we change behavior, both as we lock down and as we open up. And so what we've been focusing on to start, yeah, go ahead, buddy. So what I've been focusing on is the telecommunication data, because that provides some measure on how people move around. They're not looking at any very detailed individual level data. Basically, what we have requested is the number of people moving between postcodes in Denmark, and maybe some measure also of activity within postcodes. And this basically can give us an idea of how much traveling is going on, how much mobility is going on, which is highly useful for the epidemiological modeling, and also as a kind of rough metric on, you know, as we see, as they make decisions on how to open up, we can also see how that changes the mobility patterns and use that as feedback. Is it a big change, small change, and how does it change the impact of our prediction? So here in the short term, we've been thinking about telecommunication data, but only in this most aggregated form. In the beginning, I also had a crazy idea that we would try and infer networks between people from the telco data, but that was shut way down. So that's not something that's happening at the moment. And there's lots of stories of sort of the back and forth there, but maybe I should skip that. Then other data types that are interesting and that people have been looking at a little bit, or we have started to look at, and then we had to postpone due to both practical and legal issues, is shopping data. So who, I mean, one of the things we can't see from the telco data, but that we could potentially see from data from a bank, would be which demographics, so young, old, male, female, who is actually paying attention. And one of the ways we could get that would be to collaborate with a bank, for example, and look at transactions in at the Dankort terminals, so the Danish credit card terminals. And so in the beginning, some of my old students, ex-students, I guess, working in a large Danish bank, just because they were interested, sent me some super interesting data where they had sort of looked at different demographics, just who is using their payment cards and over time and so on. And I think that potentially going forward could be a super interesting data type, but for now we sort of need to think about how to access that and accessing it in a way where we're not breaking any laws. But they were kind of just doing it as a side thing, as part of their data science job in the bank. Yeah, so and there's a lot of other potentially interesting data sources. I know Denmark Statistics, for example, has access to the electricity data from all the Danish houses, and you can, from that, you can tell if people are home or not. It's also not something we have explored, but it's something we thought about could be interesting to see. So basically, how much time are people spending in their home? Yeah, something like that. So in this early stage, just to summarize, it's been sort of brainstorming what kind of data could tell us something about behavior, and in the very short term, focusing on the telecommunication data, because that is kind of the most informative. Oh, and then also, and then I'll stop, is there's also the Facebook turns out collects a lot of data. I'm not sure if this was clear, but they do, and they have something called Facebook Data for Good. Yes, it is true. They're trying to somehow get off the hook by donating data. When I first heard of it, I said it's kind of like in an American college rom-com, my favorite kind of movie. It's almost like a jock, one of the big buff guys from the football team saying that they like poetry or something like this. It doesn't seem very sincere, but they do have some really interesting data that we just got access to yesterday. And they also have mobility data for all the Facebook people that they're sharing with researchers. Anyone can access it. And they have some pretty insane data sets. And I don't know much about this, but for example, one of their data layers that they're developing is called the co-occurrence layer. And I think that's their estimate of how many people are actually meeting in the real world inside these geographic boxes that they're sharing. And so there's no privacy issues with what they're sharing, but it's pretty interesting that they can estimate this number, and it's potentially also highly useful for the epidemic modeling. So, but I don't know much about it yet. We just got access, and this is some of the stuff I'll be looking at later today.
Cool, Sune. I mean, some of the things that we have been discussing a lot already now at the Hope Project is, what can you get access to? What should you get access to? The fact that a lot of these data are not publicly available, but are actually held in companies, and there is a lot of kind of blurred boundaries to be explored, and a deep sense for a lot of people that if you get, the wrong practices in place now, we could live with them with unfortunate consequences for the years ahead. I mean, Noah and Anya, I mean, you have looked into a lot of this critical data science in different places. Do you have any questions or comments at this particular stage?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Sune, I want to ask you something. When you say telecommunication, are you actually saying that they're tracing our cell phones and just tracing where they're going and who they're, like, cell phones being close to one another? Is that the idea?
No, so let's back up a second. So if we stay with the telecommunication data, the telecommunication companies are always tracking all of us. They know which cell tower we're connected to, and they do this so that if you get a phone call, they can send it to your phone. Without knowing where you are, they wouldn't know where to send the signal. So this is an engineering thing. It's always been like this. And there's nothing surprising or weird about it. It's simply, how else would you get a phone call? And so what we've asked for is that if you look at geographical areas, then we can see basically how many people moved from area so we're asking for postcode. So how many people moved from postcode A to postcode B during let's say 6 hours or something like this. And so the data that we're getting is just the count of how many people who started in postcode A ended up in postcode B for all pairs of postcodes. So that's totally aggregated. And that is the telco data that we're looking at. Then there is the co-location, which has nothing to do with the telcos, but arises from Facebook. And what Facebook are doing, I have no idea about, only that they deliver data that has this kind of intriguing name. And I mean, I don't know enough to give you, I will research this. I'm interested as a citizen of the world and as someone who has now reactivated my Facebook account to access these data, about what's going on, but for now I don't know.
So all of this is fascinating and scary as hell, and part of what I'm hearing what you're saying that regarding the kind of the challenges of we want this data because it might allow us to learn certain things as researchers, and the challenges in relation to privacy and information and so on. And I'm not sure that anyone has thought this through enough to figure out, you know, if we put limits to our research, and if it's something that we need to consider, because all of this information is being collected anyway, right? So Facebook is collecting this information anyway. The telecommunication information is being collected. The reason I ask about the telecommunication is my own interest has been kind of comparing what's going on between Denmark and Israel. So I'm originally from Israel, and I've been following on what's going on there. And what they have been doing is they have been tracing people who have been identified as coronavirus carriers, whether they're actually sick or not, but they should be in isolation. And they trace their cell phones. And they trace then who was in close contact with them, so who was basically standing next to them throughout their movements, and then calling these people and telling them that they should go into isolation. So basically sending a whole bunch of people into isolation. We're talking about thousands. That's an interesting issue in itself in terms of the legality of it and the kind of implications in terms of state of exception. But there's another element, which is how does that work in different parts of society? And one of the issues that they've been coming against is that, at least in the ultra-religious communities where they don't use smartphones, that is impossible to do.
Yes.
And that becomes an issue. I'm assuming that in Denmark, there aren't that many differences across, but they still are. And one of the issues that I think we as researchers need to bring out is how all of these infrastructures and the things that are being accepted nowadays under this state of exception will be used or might be used later on under normal circumstances, under a proper democracy where everything functions as normal. And I think that's one of the things that, one of the hats that we have to keep on holding really tight on our heads, is being really careful that in our zeal to get more and more data, we're not actually producing the infrastructure to allow for even more collection of information on our lives and the kind of implications that come with it in terms of insurance and rights and so on and so forth. So that's all I have to say. I'm just kind of thinking through this.
Yeah, can I add like just a couple of comments to this? So first of all, I guess I want to say that in the Israeli case, it's an existing infrastructure that has now been revealed, which I guess is a good thing. And so they kind of had this massive surveillance platform set up. We don't have something like that in Denmark. And yep, go ahead. It's he's listening to Pop Alberta for all the Danish people. So it's great literature. And so we don't have something like this in Denmark, and the telecommunication industry, I think, is actually pretty well regulated here. So I'm not really concerned, and I don't think that we're in Denmark, and I also don't think many other places are like people that have existing surveillance infrastructure seem to be using them. But I don't see any new infrastructures being set in place yet, right? So it doesn't mean we don't have to be vigilant, but it takes time and energy to build a good surveillance system to monitor everyone. And there's simply not time for that right now. We have to react much on very different timescales. So it's also about sort of the decisions that we're taking. And I think right now, what I'm seeing in Denmark is that everyone is being very conservative, and everyone is afraid of making this kind of mistake. And so I'm just saying that I'm optimistic. I'm on your side. I don't want to start any new surveillance infrastructure for the future now, and I don't see it happen. So that's really positive. Secondly, I think with the Israeli thing, I don't think like what you're talking about there is something called contact tracing, which is something we might want to get into, and I think that we can get into in ways that completely preserve privacy, and I can talk about that if you're interested, but it's not going to work from what they're doing. It's simply not precise enough, and in a system like that, the kind of mistakes you make, basically false positives, means that you're going to have to quarantine huge swaths of the populations that aren't sick, and it's not very efficient. And false negatives are also very troublesome, as you say, because if people are sick and they're not told that they're sick, then they're going to just run around infecting people, but thinking that everything is safe. So a system like that for contact tracing can be built. I think it can be a powerful tool, but the way that the Israelis are doing it is, in my opinion, not going to work.
Yeah, they're all already having a few problems, but I thought that when you were talking about network tracing, that's what you were heading towards.
Yes, I had a different plan. I can tell you about what my crazy plan would have been, but I don't know if it's kind of wasting everyone's time. Maybe we'll say that for another time. But I had an incredibly privacy invasive plan for Denmark. That I wanted to make that I wanted to organize through Denmark statistics, and in that way kind of keep it behind that firewall, and as part of the setup that they have to make sure that you collect sensitive data without anyone actually getting access to the data, but being able to make computations on the data. And I still think that's a pretty good idea, but I think it's maybe a sidetrack for the current discussion.
Peter Dalsgaard?
Just unmuting. Thank you so much, Sune. I've been talking to quite a few people about this issue of contact tracing and if and how we might set it up in Denmark, and I was wondering if you have had a look at the model from Singapore and the app they have been developing, because that seems to somehow balance invasion of privacy with something that could potentially be effective as a contact tracing means. So just to the rest of you, the way this works is not via massive top-down surveillance, but by everyone installing an app on their phone and then using near-field communication and Bluetooth, registering who you have been nearby and for how long. It stores it only on your device for the past 21 days. It doesn't store the names of other people, but unique codes related to their phones. And then only if you are diagnosed, if you get a positive diagnosis for COVID-19, can the Singaporean authorities get access to this and then go in and see whom you have been in close contact with for an extended period of time during the past 21 days. So this seems to me like a way to balance the need for privacy with something that could be at least part of an effective solution. And I'm asking because this is one of the things that we are very concerned about, that it seems right now that the easy solution for most countries that have some kind of infrastructure set up would just be to go all out on top-down surveillance, which could turn out to be pretty draconian in many cases. So whatever we can do to push things in the other direction and even inform people that there is another way, I think we should do that.
Yeah. So someone wrote in the chat also that there's a German effort that's completely privacy sensitive or respecting, or whatever the right term is. And I'm involved in the same effort as they're adopting in Germany. I've helped out a little bit, and it is the same principle that you're describing, Peter. That basically you install an app voluntarily, and then your phone broadcasts a random ID that changes all the time, but you keep track of what you're broadcasting, and then your phone also scans through near field, where they can do pretty good estimates of who's nearby, what IDs that you have seen, and everything stays on your phone and you're fine. And then the second that you have either a serum test saying that you are immune because you've had the coronavirus, or if you have a positive test, then you can make your list available for other people to see. That can also be done through some magic of privacy that I don't even know how to summarize here, but it can be done in such a way that people can now check their list up against this to see if they've been in contact with you. So everything is in the private layer, and it needs a sort of a collaboration with the health services in any country. And I've helped with developing that. There's an app that's being developed has all the sort of best scientists from my world, who are the people that have done epidemiology and mapping contacts between people. And I think that effort is very, very promising and very impressive, and that's what I would recommend. And that's what they're doing in Germany, and I think also in Switzerland, and I think Belgium is the same one concept, but which will have sort of a national anchor. In Denmark, I think they're so paranoid about doing anything. No, yeah, we're coming. So I've been involved in the Serum Institute. I've shut down a bunch of really nice and sweet Danish startups who wanted to do the contact tracing on an app that had no privacy or whatever, and a lot of really nice people that had worked night and day to build something like this. And where I've said that I basically shut them down and said that I didn't think that the Danish government should support these people, even though they mean well, because of all the privacy issues. And then I pushed for this sort of joint larger European unit. But I think currently Denmark is not doing anything along those lines because they're just too terrified that somehow it'll be perceived the wrong way. And so that essentially anything that could have any association with surveillance, people don't want to do, even if it's completely you know, like guaranteed to be private and safe. And I should say this thing before I got really involved in it. I know some people that are really, really heavy into the privacy and the math of it. And I had them contact that group, and they have come away very impressed. Like the guy I put in contact with them is a former advisor to Vestager and doing research in privacy at Imperial College. So I really think it is rock solid, but it seems to not matter.
Carsten Bernholz?
Yeah, thank you. I was the one who wrote it in the chat just a moment ago about how Germany is considering to do something of this nature. I don't know myself much more about what Germany is doing, but Sune, do you know if Germany is about to roll this out, this privacy secured way of trying to find out who has been in contact with someone who's tested positive?
So, I mean, the project has been coordinated by a German guy called Thomas Wiegand, who's the director of the Fraunhofer Institute. They're the guys that are doing all the codecs, and they're like these kind of German applied engineering institution. And as far as I know, they're going public with it today. So they're running alpha tests and so on, but they have been in touch with the German government, and so like essentially the German people are much more worried about privacy than the Danish people, so they have been very stealthy about the development. But as far as I could tell, I chatted with him last night, they're going public today, so I guess we'll know much more.
Any more questions directly related to Sune? I mean, it's both the data story in itself, but I think these discussions about what is a conflict like a crisis like this doing to our society, how are we responding, and how does it, so to say, run down already established lines is just really, really interesting. And it might seem that there is a particular European pattern that's certainly different from what we saw in Asia, and certainly also from the US, where the UK is going seems a little bit open-ended right now. This is something that we are tracking in the HOPE project as well. So we're doing now questionnaires across Europe, the UK and the US, also to see how are these things being picked up and understood as we move along. And so far it seems that one of the important measures has to do with how much do people trust the goodwill of the government, that, you know, with trust in the government, actually a lot of these initiatives seems effective. You may actually not need to do as much as you would like to do policy-wise, because people overreact and do even more than they're told to do. Whereas if there is no trust in the government, none of these policies are going to work. So kind of very fundamental issues about, do you trust your government? Do you trust your institutions? Do you trust your scientists? Seem somehow to be deeply entangled in the kind of responses that one can come up with, which is just very interesting. Noah, do you want to feed in with the last comment here?
Yeah, a lot of what we talked about right now is just collecting very large data. I was wondering if anyone else is actually working on the law that was passed here, the epidemic law around the COVID, because I think it actually touches exactly what Andreas was talking about right now, and in relation to both forced testing and vaccination. So the part that I'm most worried about is this law passing and the idea of the government being able to forcibly vaccinate you. And this in particular in relation to the kind of histories of vaccination, the problems of vaccination around the SARS vaccination in 2009, 2010, in Sweden and in Finland particularly. But I thought that that might be just something to throw out there and hear if others are working on it or interested in it, because I actually think that it does work really nicely with this question of privacy and trust in government, and how far we are allowing all of these structures created under a state of exception to be maintained. So I just wanted to throw it out there as a question. It's something that I'd be fascinated in working on further.
I don't know of anyone who is directly looking at these new laws. It's something that should certainly be looked into, and we'll let you know, Noah, if we come up with people. So Anya, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying, Sune. I have like three things that I want to ask you. First of all, how do you make sure that the model and the model learning that you have collected once you have your access, that it's deleted afterwards? How are you actually making sure that all the learning is destroyed, so you're not making a pipeline for later use? And of course, your data pipeline is super interesting and of course very attractive when you're doing social engineering. But I guess that you're also saying that that pipeline is also destroyed afterwards. But how can you not de-anonymize in rural areas if you have cross-references to credit cards and position? I know that you cannot do it in Copenhagen, but what if you have a rural district with very few IDs moving? Thanks.
Yes. Okay, so let's take that. So further, like the telco data that we have now should not be sensitive at all. In fact, I plan to publish all of it on the internet the second we get it. So that's just the telco data on movements between postcodes. And essentially that's also because the postcodes are set up in such a way that they have a minimum number of people in them, right? So the more sparse the people are, the bigger the postcodes are, and so on. So they should be completely safe, these mobility patterns. And people are, Micah tried to send some data based on telco to one of his secret contacts, and they said, please never send anything like this again, even though I believe it's totally non-problematic. So telco data, I'm building a website and I'm going to make it public because I don't think that there's any issue. And and because that's a way to get the information out there for anyone, and I don't think there's anything secret or weird in it. So that's number one. And there is no pipeline, so to speak. We just get the count of people who moved from one place to another from the telcos, and the pipelines are all inside the telcos, and the telcos are like they have sensitive data. In terms of data from shopping, I don't have access to that now. We will only get access by putting someone inside one of the bigger banks and then having them look at the data inside the bank's system. And so I've had lots of students who've done that in the past. I've had students who've worked on like the mobile pay network, things like that, and then published the thesis with only summary data. And they are somehow, and I've never seen this data, only the statistics, but the students somehow can work on that when they're inside the bank. So for this, we would have to put researchers inside the bank. I don't know how to fix the legality of that, but once again, the bank has all this data. They need the data to run their business, and so there needs to be some kind of agreement with how this is legal. But my sense is that that the like non-disclosure agreement with the bank might cover this. I honestly don't know how it would work, but I mean, I'm interested in not only creating a big, not creating a big surveillance architecture for the future. I don't want that. And I also want to, keep having a job for many years. So before we send researchers to any bank who would want to collaborate with us, which we don't have right now, then we would figure out how to do it legally, and then take it from there. Essentially, would be my strategy.
But Sune, you are also you're publishing this, right? And you also know how highly that social behavior is very highly predictable. So you are creating a model that is going to be used afterwards. Even though you are not having the data yourself, you still have the learning done on top of that data. So you are creating a structure.
But are we talking about the bank now or the telco data?
You're combining the two, right?
Not right now, and
but ideally you would combine them.
Well, I mean, so the thing that we're modeling now just has to do with, like, number one, quantifying how much activity is there in society, period. That's like task number one. And it's literally like saying on a normal day we see this much stuff, and on another day we see like now much less stuff. And then we say now, you know, the kids can go back to school, and we see it's now this much more activity in like a super general sense of like movement between postcodes, or like number of people that go shopping in a daily in the grocery store. There's no fancy models or anything. It's just counting some stuff to get a sense. So that is like reporting on what is the change that we observe as a function of the opening up. It's that simple. I'm not doing anything fancy. Then and no models in I think in any kind of sense that is like a learning that we should worry about. I might be wrong, and I'm happy to listen, but this is how I see it. And then there's an epidemic modeling, which is to understand like how many sick people will we see in 2 weeks and 3 weeks. How many people should the ICUs expect to see? And those types of models, you know, are essentially these models that date back to the 1900s. There are a couple of differential equations, the SIR, the SEIR models. And what we do is we build a model for that for each little area based on the observed sick people, and then we couple them with the flow that we see between areas. And then as we see the flow change, as the restrictions are gradually lifted, we can update the projections of what we would see happening. But once again, there's no individuals involved here. And so one of the things that we need to have as a parameter in this model is how much activity do we see inside each cell. And that's basically to understand how many infections are we going to see happening inside each cell. And for that, we would use something like, we could use telco data for this, but we could also use shopping data for this. It's just some abstract activity, again, just a very rough count. And then we would try and scale that, basically fit that with the observed number of sick people, to understand how we can have a sense of how activity in this very general sense is linked to the epidemic parameters of number of infected. But again, this is super aggregated on the level of thousands of people, and there's no kind of learning about individuals or how this data from individuals. We take the data from individuals and then we aggregate it to just get abstract measures of activity in both cases. So I'm not very, like, I don't, like, I think a lot of people, I mean, I read the Zuboff book and I think it's fantastic and it blew my mind. But I think if there's one issue where Zuboff is kind of like a little bit off the mark still, is what they can even do at Google. And the same thing, I think people are kind of think that I can do much more than I can actually do. But we're just counting stuff, and the models are not as sophisticated as you might think. It is very kind of non-granular stuff.
Okay, so I think this is a question we'll be returning to again and again, because this is, it really touches on some fundamental issues about what is data, what is available, what does it mean to share them, what can you do for the purpose of public good, where is privacy involved in it. And it's really, really useful to be able to bring this out in a large forum, drawing in expertise from different countries and from different forms of ethnographies, etc. So it's not to close the discussion now. I'm sure we'll return to it again at a later stage. But the mic now goes on to Rebekah, because we have also begun, or rather Rebekah and Christopher have begun to, sorry, Sune, yeah?
Just one thing, Anya, I'd like to hear your answer and thoughts on this, but maybe we can follow up offline, because I think it's super interesting, and I'm like, this is, I'd like to not do anything wrong. So I really welcome kind of all critical feedback and so on. So perhaps we can we can follow up another time, because I am concerned about this, but I understand we need to move on and we can't do it in this forum. So yeah, thank you everyone.
Great. I mean, I'll get you in touch, Noah and Sune, if you don't know each other already. Yeah. So another thing that we have begun to gather is to look at the social media, just to see, how do this epidemic or idea of an epidemic spread in the social media. And Rebekah, could you show some really early indices of that?
Sure. I'm just going to share my screen briefly, because I did a little mock-up of what we're doing this week. Okay, how do I? So can everyone see my screen? Yes. Okay. So I specialize in computational linguistics and natural language processing. So the question I'm sort of bringing to this project is, how can we use large and diverse textual data sets and NLP tools to address some of the HOPE research questions? So we wanted to get started as quickly as possible with a readily available data set, and one of the quickest and easiest types of data to use from social media is Twitter. So many of us associated with the IMC and the Center for Humanities Computing have been scraping ourselves. There are also big Twitter data sets related to COVID-19 that have been released. So we have millions and millions of tweets from the past 3 months. What we've done this week is we're extracting all of the Danish language tweets. And then we're also trying to capture, of course, tweets in English that are about or from Denmark. So we're doing this by, there are a couple options. We can use a geocode that's within Denmark for non-Danish language tweets, or because a lot of tweets don't have a geocode, we're also collecting English tweets that have a specifically Danish hashtag. So I've constructed a list of these. They include Corona DK, Sundpol, DK, Dekopol, and then some that have emerged more recently, like Hjemmeskole or Bliva Hjemme. So we're collecting tweets from any languages that have these hashtags. An issue with Twitter in many countries, including Denmark, is that it's not particularly widely used. So our data set for Twitter is a bit sparse. And so it's not going to make sense to look at sort of trends or patterns by the hour or even by the day. So one thing that I thought to do is to sort of block the data together into larger time chunks that are aligned with specific events that have affected us here in Denmark. So, of course, the first first COVID-19 case in Denmark was in late February. On the 11th of March, Mette Frederiksen announced the initial restrictions. She addressed the nation again on the 18th. That was also the night of the Queen's address. And then there was another speech on the 23rd announcing that the lockdown would be continued until mid-April. So these seem like really important kind of moments for Danish society with respect to our experience of this epidemic. So we've kind of we're going to batch the data into these time-bounded bins. And then we have some NLP tools at our disposal that will allow us to extract certain types of information from the texts. So because we're working with Twitter, naturally we'd want to look at top and trending hashtags during each of these eras. We can also do topic modeling, which is an unsupervised machine learning method for kind of clustering and quantifying tweet texts by their topical similarity. Then named entity recognition, so extracting named entities like persons, locations, and organizations to see who's talking about what, when, and then sentiment. So we can use a Danish sentiment lexicon to assign a sentiment score to each tweet. And how this can assist the project, I think, is that it can directly bear on some of our research questions. So we can ask questions like, what are the common labels that people are organizing their communication around? and look to hashtags for some answers. What are the top themes of the posts? So our topic models will give us some collections of related words that make up these kind of thematic categories. So health-related or hospital-related text, text related to being at home with children, and the closure of schools. We can look at, of course, at what people, places, and institutions are being discussed. And then for any of these, we can look at how people are generally feeling about it. Are the tweets generally more positive or more negative? So this is just kind of the initial study that we're doing with Twitter. We can, of course, look at different interactions or correspondences across these different types of information sources. So say we're interested in the period following the initial lockdown, we can look at all of the tweets that mention Mette Frederiksen and see whether they're generally positive or negative, or we could look at the phase leading up to the initial lockdown and look at what are the themes of, or what is the sentiment around the posts tagged COVID-19 de Coninck that also discussed hospitals, doctors, and health, and see, is there a lot of anxiety being expressed in these posts, or are they generally optimistic? We don't have these results yet, so this is a mock-up. This is just purely illustrative. And then, of course, Twitter is just one of many, many textually rich data sources that we're going to be collecting for this project. So you can think about how we could integrate other types of data sources into this sort of model. So speeches, interviews, press releases, newspaper articles, then things like surveys, interviews, polls, even diaries. And then, of course, many, many different types of social media platforms exist: Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, comments on articles, TikTok, YouTube. We're talking about all of these as data sources that we might use in this project. Yeah, so I'm working on this with Christopher Nielbo, the Center for Humanities Computing, including Kenneth Endelson and Maris Sala. I think Maris is on the call as well. And we're trying to get something up to display on the website this week, and then we'll be taking it from there. So I would love to hear your comments, feedback, ideas, and so on. Yeah, I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thanks, Rebecca. So the pipelines are just being set up for analysis, but it gives some idea as what can be done. Any questions or suggestions at this stage?
I should mention one thing that I think would be really neat to have on the website is actually a sort of interactive dashboard that end users could interact with. So for example, you could choose which data sources you want to include in the model. So like newspapers, newspaper headlines and tweets, say. And then you could decide whether you want to look at hashtag trends, how they've evolved over time, and then sentiment scores over time for these for the tweets attached to these hashtags, or you could choose to look at different parameters. That would be, I think, a really neat thing to do. We probably won't have that for a little while, but.
So that would be kind of an explainable for social media analysis. Peter can talk more about the explainable idea a little bit later. That would be very interesting. I can also say that we have also, as of tomorrow, there will be 5 anthropologists moving into different parts of the Danish society to try to get some kind of qualitative insight. What does life look like at the hospital, the acute ward on the hospital, in schools, among elderly people, etc. So Charlotte Nørholm, who is joining us today, is part of the ethnography team, and Mette Terpøyby is involved in it with me and Jens Seberg. We'll update you more on these things as we are actually able to figure out how to do the field work in these situations. Obviously, a lot of it, we have to move online for all sorts of reasons, but there are also places where it's possible and sensible still to do something that looks more like more traditional ethnography. And it's our clear idea that these, so to say, deep dives into what does it look like in different fields and places will be critical for us to try to understand and to learn from it.
Yeah.
Now,
it looks like Simon has a question.
Yeah, Simon?
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to ask you, Rebecca, are you looking also at, like as a moral psychologist, I'm always interested in like moral dimensions of things. And I've been wondering about how people might start moralizing this kind of conflict, right? Like starting moralizing, you know, people who violate social distancing norms, right? You see tweets who call out other people and these kinds of things.
It's not something that we've talked about yet, but I'm very, as a linguist, I'm also very interested in extracting certain types of, so I'm mostly interested in like causal reasoning. So one of the things that in my own research I'd like to look at is sort of how are people reasoning causally or counterfactually about, you know, the evolution of these events, or, you know, if we don't go out, the virus will be contained by N time. But another thing you could do is look at things like use of modal verbs, or like you shouldn't do this because such and such, or I wouldn't do such and such. You probably have better ideas about what types of linguistic markers indicate sort of moral reasoning. But that's certainly a dimension we could look into. Yeah,
I'd love to to help on that if that comes to.
Let's definitely be in touch about that.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, super cool. So next on to the diary study that has been launched by the National Museum in Copenhagen, and but really Ning has been the mover and shaker that kind of brought people together and made it possible in the first instance. Ning has to leave very soon, but we were hoping to get you, Ning, to just say a little bit about, you know, what's the status of the study, and do we know anything about also what could research-wise be done with it after the first kind of set of data coming in?
I'm just, thanks for the invite. I'm just trying to share the PowerPoint I've made. I made a little PowerPoint just to keep myself. Can you see it now?
Not yet.
Okay, let's see. Here we go. Share. Sorry, there's so many buttons to press. I feel completely old-fashioned compared to what we've just been listening to, Rebekah's and Christopher's project. But what we are up to is actually quite similar in a way, because it appears that there are so many initiatives going on, and it's not only the Danish National Museum which is collecting stories from days with Corona. It's also the National Archives and the Royal Library, just to mention two. And then I'm also going to tell you about two of my colleagues who are also setting up their own research projects. And I think it sort of bounced down to, we have to think about can we share some of this information afterwards, and how do we do it? And just a very few brief words about the National Museum project. That actually is so that since 1940, the Danish National Museum have been collecting lists of, they've been asking Danes about life at various occasions, how do they do this and that. And I've been part of a think tank where we've been discussing and looking at some of the most recent ones, the one from 1997 and the one from 1992, sorry. And then when all this happened, I thought as a historian, after our meeting at IMC 2 weeks ago, that I had to show some samfundssind. And I was actually surprised that might be one of the hashtags you should look at in Rebekah and Christopher's project. But if you're not looking at the word samfundssind, I think that is a new interesting term that we should look more carefully at. What does that mean to people? Anyway, in my case, I called first the National Archives, and they just told me, oh, it's none of our business. And later on, it shows up, and it certainly is of their business. So fortunately enough, they started rethinking. And secondly, I called the National Museum, and here we are. The whole collection, or the whole project, was launched on Friday, and it's going on for the next 2 weeks, where people are asked to write about everyday life. And then there's been a lot of bureaucracy, and seen sort of from a perspective of I can show you actually the call. Let's see, I had opened it here in a browser so you could see it. Jens Seeberg and a lot of other people joined in to try and qualify their call, and I know I can't do that with this speed, sorry about that, but anyway, we were, I would say there was a lot of work put into creating this call, and eventually the call was put out publicly on Friday, And there's been a lot of going back and forth between the institutions of the Royal Library as well as the National Archives. And now it has ended up, as you can see in my slides, which is, where is my slide? What is happening here? My slide has disappeared. So sorry. Let's see. Anyway, I actually put here we go, it's here. I'll share it again. Sorry, it's just because if you click on this press release, you will see that what they're trying now is actually to coordinate what's supposed to go on. So the National Archives are collecting data from the ministries, but they are also asking ordinary people to write into them, and which was actually the job for the National Museum. And the Royal Library is collecting all things and pieces and photos and stuff, you know. So basically, they're probably treading in each other's spinach plot, as we say in Danish, but hopefully we'll just get a lot of information, and we're not going to do more. We can't do more to this, but it says something about these individual interests of these different institutions. And I do think it's really sad in a way, but leave that aside. Then just to tell you a few words of projects going on in my own department of education. There's a younger colleague of mine called Ida Wetzel-Winter, who's also been part of framing the call. I have to say the call has so many words to it. I think that's my criticism. There's so many interests that had to be taken into account, and the National Museum also have their ways of doing it. And I've just tried to be the facilitator between researchers and the National Museum. And when I look at the call now, I just have to say there are way too many words and way too many sort of questions people can be inspired by. But let's hope that people have time now, that they can simply have time to look it over several times and not get too pushed away by all these words. Ida has a project. She's been collaborating with us on the children's side. So there are some questions that parents and children can discuss together. And we hope, I mean, because of GDPR, children can't upload their own videos. We have to go through the parents. So there's a little section for parents and children where they can talk about everyday life and so on. And as you can see here, she's also starting up her own project. So if you want to get in touch with her, or you think you could share something with her, I definitely think you should get in touch with her. Another project is Dorte Marie Søndergaard setting up a project about young people. And when it comes to people being vulnerable in this situation, I think everybody thought it would be people like me being, you know, 60 plus, 65 plus, that would be especially vulnerable. Now, I mean, of course, people die when they're over 80 and they get into hospital, but basically we have an issue with the young people being vulnerable in this situation because either they don't understand or they don't want to understand what's going on. And they don't want to comply. And you can also see when the police has been out, I mean, the people they've been targeting have, to some degree, also been young people. So Dorte Marie is setting up this project with young people, and I think that is really, really important because they are really moving around in society, and they are, in many cases, fed up by all these restrictions. So these are just two other examples, and then we have local museums collecting diaries and memoirs and stuff. And I just think we have to live with the fact that there's so much out there. And this brings me to my last point, and that is what's going to happen in the future. Now, when we had a meeting last Friday with Andreas, no, not Andreas, but Jens Seeberg and other important people, Klaus Høyer from KU and Morten Pedersen also from KU, we talked about creating a data well where everybody could, you know, throw in and your lucky coin, and then eventually you could get something out of it. And I think we have been asking, or the National Museum have been asking Velux Foundation for about 1 million kroner to help them develop these data well. Now, I learned today that there are 2 other projects asking Velux for money. So, and we haven't had any reply yet, so we definitely don't know where this is going to take us. But I really think we have to figure out how to coordinate and how we can be able to share. And I know there is a lot of legal aspects of this, but I think sharing becomes extremely important because a lot of what I heard Rebekah telling us a moment ago could be very useful for the kind of research I personally had in mind, or my colleague Ida Winter had in mind, or Dorte Marie for that matter. So I think this whole sharing thing becomes very important. And another thing is that in the head of the people from the National Museum, their idea was to set up eventually a big national research project with several work packages where they also wanted to have a share in that, because they are also a research institution. We tend to forget that because we think it's all about creating shows and so on, but they are actually a research institution, and they are so low on money for research. But we have to figure out how to coordinate that with the whole project and with all the other initiatives. And I don't have any good answers to this. And I think we are actually just have to move on now, get the stuff in, and then figure out what we're going to do with it in the future. And if Velux is not funding this Project Zero, the National Museum is funding what's going on now anyways. And then we might have to figure out what we do eventually, just to pay them or pay some of their expenses if we can cover that in some ways, or we can find another foundation where we can apply for money. So yeah, it's been hectic and it's been fantastic, and I think this situation brings up fantastic creativity in all of us, which I think we should be extremely grateful for. And for me personally, it's been a wonderful experience, because I've been sitting so lonely in my office at DPU in Copenhagen, Emdrup, without any colleagues whatsoever to play with. I mean, I have very good friends about my colleagues, but I don't have anybody around me who do things that are kind of similar to what I am interested in. So this whole Zoom business it's been a fantastic experience, but also very overwhelming. And I also have to say that I have seen myself as a facilitator more as someone who had really strong opinions about this. And that's also why I think I could maybe have been more involved in the questionnaire, but my take on it was that it was the National Museum that has the experience. They've done this before. They were taking the lead on it. And I thought that was more important than what I personally thought about too many words. Yeah. So yeah, feel free to ask me. I have about 10 minutes and then I have to leave you.
Thank you, Ning. So any questions, please raise your hand in the participant or wave, whatever. I'll try to keep an eye on people. Rebekah, maybe you could just briefly comment on, the possibilities for integrating analysis across different sources like this. I mean, I guess this is what some of the NLP tools could potentially do.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we can really, like, given the sort of model that I showed, really any data at all that's time aligned could be integrated in an interesting way. Whoops, just lost the window. Sorry. But then, of course, any sort of textual data, and that would include ethnographic interviews or diaries, anonymized, of course. We could also use the same sort of NLP techniques to extract information about what's being talked about, how is it being talked about, get measures of sort of like, is this an anxious, is there anxiety here? Is this positive? Is this optimistic? And of course, you could sort of see to what degree diary entries or personal interviews are sort of consistent at certain times with what we're seeing emerge from the social media patterns, or whether they're not. I think that, yeah, there are a lot of different ways that these could be integrated in interesting and mutually beneficial ways.
Yeah, I have to say that I totally agree. We just have to, I mean, it's fantastic how easily these institutional interests come up into people, no matter if they tell each other, oh, we have to share this and that, suddenly, boom. And there's no coordination. So suddenly the National Archives start working on this instead of giving me a call saying, hey, Ning, we know blah, 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 but no way, forget about it. So I totally agree with you. I have to say the questionnaire is translated into 4 different or 5 different languages because as you might know, Mette Frederiksen at the beginning, when they came out with all these corona advices, she was not ready to have them translated in anything. I mean, people who live in this country, they have to speak and read Danish. I mean, that's just how it is. Now, fortunately enough, because of the seriousness of the situation, I think, or the seriousness of the situation, I think she start thinking maybe we should have them translated. So this will also be translated into the most representative foreign languages in this country. And I think that is really great, because I was worried that this would cause a lot of outcry from the Dansk Folkeparti, etc. And we haven't heard any of this. Yeah, I agree with you, Rebekah. I think there's a lot of things to share and a lot of inspiration. And actually, I came to think of, once this is over, I think we should consider, I don't know what's in the HOPE project, but basically I think one should think about setting up a conference and also making an online publication with the first results, so that we can somehow inspire each other. And I think, my colleagues, Dorte Marie and Ida and their groups, could easily participate in such a cross-university or cross-universities project, as it would probably be, because we also need to include people from DTU and Copenhagen and where else people are working on this. So I basically think there's a lot of possibilities. And then Mette has asked me, is this only running for 2 weeks? I think so. And the uploading part is only from 6th of April, because they couldn't get the upload website up and running as fast as they wanted to. And again, we have to remember the National Museum is funding this all by themselves, which is an enormous generosity, because they have zero money normally for these kinds of things. But I think the importance of the situation and also of getting it in now made them see that we just had to pay for this ourselves. So they're working with their own people, and they are sort of making use of the competences they have in-house to make this happen. And I'm also saying this just to warn ourselves about being too critical about it, because I think this is what was possible at the moment. And I think it could easily, there's a synergy between what Andreas and Jens have in mind with the HOPE project and going out into Denmark and talking to people. One of the things that strikes me when I talk to all my neighbors and everybody I've spoken to, people are happy. They think this is great. They love being home with their children. It's just, I had thought it would be a catastrophe, people were being divorced right away, etc. But it's completely different stories that I'm hearing, which has also said something about my prejudice about this whole situation. And nobody knows anybody who's been ill. So this is probably a bubble, but I thought it was kind of interesting. So it's going to be really interesting if you can get out in society and check out with people who are not in the same academic bubble as the rest of us. Yeah.
Noah, you got a suggestion?
It's a suggestion, but also just to tell you a little bit about what I've been doing. And it's actually something that Rebekah had said before about we'd like to have these ethnographic interviews. So one of the issues that we've been dealing with is how to even do these interviews, because we can't meet face-to-face, or a lot of people can't meet face-to-face. I have a group of 35 students who were literally stuck right at the moment when the lockdown happened. They were supposed to go out and do field work, and within 2 weeks they had to kind of change all of their projects and do projects on Corona. So I now have around 32 students who are Tilvad students, so non-anthropologists who've been taking anthropology with me for the past year and are doing ethnographic research on this. Now, I don't know how many of you are, have courses and can get your students to go out and do things. But one of the things that I've done with them is is create a blog with them that's produced a lot of material from their own experiences, and they post pictures and short journal commentaries and so on, but also things that they've seen, things that they get interested in, and their own projects where they focus and do a lot of interviews. So a lot of this is also called up questions about digital ethnography and how we can do interviews, what kind of setups we can have around them. And that doesn't require a lot of money. What it requires is people that know enough students who are interested and willing to participate. They have the time to do that, and a little bit of training on how to go about doing it. So what I'm trying to say is that there are, I think, these initiatives out there. So that's one thing that I wanted to say, and I think it would be interesting to kind of see if there are more of those around. The other is just to mention that at least within anthropology, the journal Social Anthropology is going to come out with short pieces of people reacting to COVID-19 at the moment. These are 500-word pieces. They're going to come out in May as they call it an urgent form. I wonder if there isn't a place to do it right now with material that we already have, instead of waiting until we can get a big a place at a museum or a real publication, but doing something much quicker where we're creating closer interactions between what's going on in all of these institutions, so university, National Museum, National Archive, and so on, and the public. Because one of the things that I find myself in this situation particularly thinking about is, what is our role at the university and all these institutions? It's not only to collect, but it's actually to provide a way in for people to think with. And if we can do that on a quicker basis and not wait another 3 years until this publication comes out and it's completely irrelevant because we're in the next epidemic already, then that would be a really nice thing to give back and to show that, you know, there's a reason why we're doing what we're doing. That aside from the long-term kind of view, so I just thought I'd put it out there again.
Yeah, I agree again. Of course, it's, I mean, we have to think in publications of at various speeds, I think. And some of these articles or data collection need a more profound working through, I think. So we also have to be careful without bringing things out too early. As you can see, the group in Copenhagen around Klaus Høyer, they are already in the press with what they have found about what people worries about. So I think there are different sort of steps in this whole communication process, but I do think it's really important that we as researchers are out there and are actually trying to qualify and help the journalists about, you know, what's going on and which questions should we ask, what should we worry about, etc., and what do our research tell us about how people think or act in a situation like this. There could be a lot of possibilities with podcasts. I mean, you have Radio 4 in Aarhus, which certainly needs some boosting academically, in my mind. So this handheld radio, I mean, there's a lot of possibilities of sort of easier way of getting out there with, and then waiting later with more profoundly researched contributions, I think. And for me as a historian, and one of the things I would really like would be to do a comparative study of some of the older collections of diaries that has been collected and saved at the National Museum. But there are some really, really tough GDPR issues that they also are asking Velux for money to work on. Have some legal expertise working on that. Anyway, guys, I really have to leave you because I have a speciale and I still need to read half of it. And so I think students, I mean, are also important, and at least this is the last day for the censoring, so I think I better leave you. But thanks a lot for listening to me, and thanks a lot, Andreas, for putting all this together. I think it's I get so much inspiration from listening both to Sune and to Peter and Rebekah, and I do hope we can collaborate in the future, and then we can bring people together and share what we have gotten. So yeah, take good care of yourself. I can't see myself right now, but maybe I can. No, I can't, but that doesn't matter. Now I will be waving to you all. Here I am, and I will take care of my speciale.
Nice to your student, Ning.
Yeah. Okay, take care. Talk to you some other day. Bye-bye.
So we have as Ning was saying, it seems to spawn not just chaos and crisis and depression, but also a lot of creativity. And Andreas Lieberoth, I know, has been kind of working like crazy over the last couple of weeks to pull together a huge international survey. Andreas, would it be okay for you to share a little bit what's the idea behind it? What are the questions you're asking? What do you see coming in it right now?
Sure, I can do that. I'm just going to share my screen as well. I don't have like a formal presentation, but I do have some data that I can that I can kind of use to illustrate what we're up to. So a lot of people have been telling their stories now, so I'm going to try to keep this pretty short. But basically, a week ago, a little more than a week ago now, Mauro Diaz, who is attached to Science at Home, and I had a conversation about kind of the differences of what was going on in different cultures in different countries. With his background in Colombia, there's not much, or there wasn't at the time at least, not much going on in terms of kind of lockdown efforts and kind of social provisions. Whereas in Denmark, we just shut everything down. So we got really interested in, so what would be the differences, both in terms of kind of behavior and also the kind of the stress and anxiety that goes into something like this, based on different, basically on what's going on in different countries. So we decided that we'd do a survey to compare Denmark and Colombia, and reached out to some colleagues in the US and Italy as well, because we thought that could be interesting. And then something happened, because we thought, hey, maybe other countries or people from Italy or the US or Colombia and Denmark would be interested. So we posted on a researcher network group on Facebook. And after a couple of hours, we had like 250 people from different universities all over the world who said, yes, we also want to do a survey that could compare different countries. And can we help? Can we be involved? Can we maybe translate the survey to our language and stuff like that? So basically, I have been working 14 hours a day without weekends since Thursday, a little more than a week ago, on coordinating all these great people who on one hand wanted to collaborate on building a really interesting international survey, and on the other hand on just translating and sharing the one that we built. So what I have now, and that's really the main story, I guess, is that what could turn out to be one of the largest kind of international, at least non-paid snowballed sample surveys of kind of coronavirus self-report data right now. We have, at the moment, it's released in 42 languages in all over the world. We have collaborators who are making, or at least have said that they'd make a major effort to share it through media and channels in 43 countries. And generally, it's been quite the roller coaster ride, just getting a lot of people in who all have different ideas about what would be the important questions to ask in a time like this, kind of broadly. So to give you an idea about kind of the scope that we might be looking at, we soft launched it in Denmark last Thursday, so like 5 days ago, and from that we got about 7,000 responses, which is amazing for something that's just snowballed. I've never seen anything like that. And of course, we don't expect something like that to happen in Bangladesh necessarily, but we do hope that we can get a lot of data in for kind of some big multi-level based analyses. Just kind of to finish the story about what it is, we decided that this should be a very open science, open collaboration project. So we put it on the Open Science Framework as a pre-registered survey once we kind of decided on what would be the final content of it. And we are working on a registered report for one of the big journals that's decided to waive fees and fast track registered reports for COVID-19 data. And we're going to do data dumps every week to OSF as well, so everyone who potentially wants to make use of this data can get at it and compare maybe the countries that they're interested in or whatever. So what's in the survey? Well, I've spent more than a week trying to hold off all the people who had really good ideas and wanted to add stuff to the survey and say, oh, could we ask this question, or could we ask this question as well? But basically what's in it right now is an open, kind of a long list of things that we're interested in, looking from, on one hand, a perspective on just kind of psychological stress, because we have the same intuitions that Ning did. So like I said to Lynn Skeptical last week, maybe in some countries or for some families, the real problem is how can we feed our children now that we can't work? For other families like mine, it's really how can I not kill my children because I need to spend every waking moment with them. So the stressors that's going into different kind of family situations in different countries might be very different. And that's kind of the thing that I was interested in at first. Apart from that, we tried to coordinate with the HOPE project as well. So we have some of the same items that are being used there in the survey as well. So we have the Big Five personality inventory in the short form, and we have questions about, we already did, but we've kind of tried to line them more about compliance with behavioral measures to kind of stem the spread of coronavirus, compliance with social distancing, specifically because we want to look at the impact of extroversion on that, and kind of different predictors of who might not have an easy time keeping social distance in a time like this. We have questions about kind of, like you also mentioned, Andreas, trust in the government, the degree to which people think that their government's efforts are sufficient or maybe overdoing it a little bit, because we do see that in the media that people say it's too much, it's unnecessary, why should this be going on at all? So we're trying to get at critical people as well. And then a bunch of demographic background, like are they isolating, how are they isolating, how many people are isolating together, do people have any close relations who are actually in a exacerbated risk group? We're doing this entirely anonymously to comply with GDPR and to kind of get the ethics waiver that we can get in Aarhus to collect not too many personal data. So we're not asking about any symptoms at all. We're just saying, is anyone close to you in the exacerbated risk group, to see if people could be more sensitive to something like that. Then we're doing the old Tversky and Kahneman Asian disease problem, because I thought that would be a hoot to actually do the Asian disease test in a time where there is an actual honest to God Asian disease going around. And we're looking into that for a paper on how to frame risky behaviors in a time such as this. Should communication be focused on trying to save lives or trying to prevent deaths? And I won't scroll through the entire thing. I can just share the Open Science link with you in the chat in a moment, so you can get at it if you want to. But basically, we're looking at a lot of kind of trust measures, which is based on OECD standards. We're looking at the perceived stress scale. We're looking at a bunch of different exploratory stressors that we're interested in, kind of like what I mentioned. Could it be about lacking social contact, or about social factors, or about can I not wipe my bottom in a month because there will be no more toilet paper, or whatever stuff like that. And media behaviors as well, because I'm a media psychologist. So I'm, of course, interested in how we change our social and information behavior in a time such as this. So I guess if I should just, I know I said I would do it quickly, and I've tried to, because there's a lot of stuff going on here. But basically, we're doing like a massive open science effort. If you look at the screen now, you can see these are the people in the universities that are involved. We have a pretty big contingent in Taiwan, for instance, working in Hong Kong as well, working in China and Chinese and all over the EU. I got an email from the EU yesterday asking if they could be of any assistance. So it turns out that this might be a really big cross-national exploratory survey effort. And based on our experiences from Denmark, it could turn out to be really huge and would be like a massive, well-powered tool for doing all kinds of cross-national comparisons based on the data that we have. If we don't get the same kind of data in for every country, the multi-level modeling power analyses that we've done suggest that we need not much more than maybe 1,000 people from each country. So we can actually do a lot with kind of a fair amount of responses. Although, of course, more responses means probably less of a bubble, more representativeness in the different countries. So yeah, basically we want to collaborate with more people, anyone who have international contacts that can help us share this to boost the data. We could really use your help. I'd really like you to get in contact with me. We are also, like Ning mentioned, thinking about ways to publish or publicize this pretty quickly to kind of have a practical impact once we have some data that we can actually use. So we're looking into some of the journals that that are now kind of trying to do fast track stuff, and also we're discussing whether to do a special issue somewhere if we can find a journal that's waiving the fees, because I don't have the money to do an entire frontiers journal, for instance. I guess that's the story, if I should just kind of try to summarize what it is and what we're doing. And in a week, we'll know if we have like a massive international, really useful survey, but at the moment, at least it's an impressive effort on the 100 plus researchers involved, and we're going to get a lot of publications out of what we have, I think. For me, the publications are not the goal. For me, the goal is to get a really nice, big open science database for people to look into if they have something that they would want to do with data like this. Yeah.
It's also clear from this and from the other presentations that we have tools available to understand the situation that were just never there before, right? And in that sense, we should not be stuck with thinking of the epidemic using models from last century, neither the mathematical models or the kind of mappings out of people's behavior and sentiments, and also the type of reflective space that can be created these days is just so completely different from how we used to think about these things here. So just moving it to open science instead of staying inside of knowledge silos, is potentially completely reconfiguring how we can do things like this. Any immediate questions for Andreas on this one here? Otherwise, do follow up with him directly. We have a couple of more initiatives on the burner that would be nice just to touch base on, because it's spawned so many new ideas and creativity. Micah, would you be willing to say something about the interoception measure?
Andreas, there is a few questions on this.
I can't see any. Who has questions?
So Chris had a question.
Yeah, Chris, by all means.
I had quickly raised my hand, but then withdrawn it. I just asked in the chat whether you have a collection of links to the survey in different languages, so that I could spread that to people speaking different languages.
Yes, I do. I'll just share that real quick. Mm-hmm.
Great. Any other questions now? Carsten, you're keeping track of people. Rebekah?
Yeah, I had a quick question. So this is kind of inspired by, I saw an interesting academic Twitter tweet the other day by a psychologist named AIAS, who was kind of keeping track of, well, actually, first, let me preface this by saying, Andreas, this is awesome. This is amazing. And I'm so excited to see the gigantic open science data set that you get. What this tweet sort of brought up, and what I found really interesting about it, is that there are a lot of different surveys, as you know, going on right now that are addressing how people are coping with this epidemic in different societies. And a lot of them are very, very focused on personality. And the question that I have raised is, are we overly individualizing the like these behavioral studies of relating to the epidemic, insofar as we're looking at sort of behavioral, linking behaviors like hoarding or not following government guidelines to things like personality, or like how selfish you are, or how individualistic you are. And we're sort of, perhaps we're risking ignoring like structural and systemic and societal factors that make, for example, maybe hoarding in a society like Denmark with a lot of social trust and relatively robust supply chains. Maybe that would be a very selfish behavior in Denmark, but what about in a place like India, or some place where that's really your survival might depend on taking certain behaviors, and it's completely rational and even from the perspective of preserving your family or local community, quite moral. And I'm just really curious about how we could, especially as we do these sorts of international studies, how we could take into account the sort of social and systemic factors in addition to the personality and individual factors.
So I've been discussing this with the people in our group, and there's a huge effort that has to go into that, definitely, especially with a data set like ours, which is both collected over We've registered it as open for the next 2 months and maybe longer to see how things go, because it could also be an interesting way of kind of following trends in different locations over time, if the ball gets rolling in a nice way. So one big task that I'm hoping that I have one guy who is working on now, and I hope that we can get a team together on, is to collect those kind of systemic data to be able to link it up with this survey that we have. So we can, on one hand, follow the timelines in different countries, but also exactly like you say, entering what we already know from different existing measures of how cultures differ or how socioeconomic situations differ, stuff like that. So we can actually exactly say that, okay, so hoarding is going on to a massive extent in India, but not so much in Denmark. I wonder why that is, and then kind of try to get into the mediating factors that might be in play there. So for the first publication that we're going for, we're trying to be really kind of just descriptive and say, so what are the between countries differences, and then opening up to, okay, then how can we explain that later on? Because I think that's really the main offering of what we're doing compared to all this shit ton of other surveys that are going on out right now, because I get so many emails from people saying, we are also doing a survey, can we coordinate? And then, yeah. So I think people will drown in survey links within the next week or so.
Yeah.
Noah, you had a comment as well?
Yeah, just two quick things. I'm torn, partially because I completely understand the great things that can come out of this kind of big survey. And I think there's a lot of really interesting information that you can gather from it. But I'm torn because I know, as an anthropologist, the complexities that go into both answering survey and the kind of elements that come into it. I personally haven't yet done the survey. I will, but I've had my family do the survey. And one of the things that we had discussed, apart from the actual technicalities of it, which is apparently it's a little big, it's very, very long, and the way that it appears on the screen is hard to follow. So you have to move it back and forth, and it's not easy for everyone to do. But again, I'm thinking both of the place where I grew up and my research area, which is Argentina. Both places are in horrific political situations and economic situations. In Argentina, it's very obvious. In Israel, it's not yet obvious. It will be. And I keep thinking, how will this affect both behavior and the possibility of even answering this kind of questions when you have, and I'm sure that comes up in the Colombia-Denmark comparison, but I'm not sure that you can actually integrate all of that information, and certainly not by one person, in relation to this whole survey. And maybe we need to recognize that there are different kinds of answers and different kinds of levels of detail that we can get into, and that we won't be able to interconnect them. In Argentina, the way that people will respond to the government closing off or locking down everything is going to be very, very different in relation to what is, the latest elections, the new government, different histories of lockdown. So that would be completely different than Denmark. But I would know that, and I would know the connections, and I would be able to see that on Twitter, for example, because I've worked there for the past 15 years, right? But that's quite different than the kind of details and understandings that you might be able to get. And maybe we do need to separate the two and say, there's a limit. And therefore, we need to focus on certain things that we can understand in the survey that we won't be able to understand from the kind of very detailed ethnographic research that I can do. So that's, I don't know, I thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I'm a mixed methods researcher. I was originally trained in kind of more ethnographic methods and then kind of moved on to stuff like this. So I am extremely mindful of what we're not getting. And one thing that we're not getting, for instance, is a representative sample in countries that are less technologically saturated than Denmark, for instance. So there are a ton of different things that we can definitely not say with this data set. And that's something that at least is high on my agenda as well, to be just kind of try to be mindful of what else should we be doing. And I've been discussing with myself, can I, in good conscience, for instance, send my students out to do observations in parks or for woods or on playgrounds, places like that? Because I'd say that for me, that would actually be much more interesting than some random psychometric skill that we can enter into something like this. So yes, and I really hope that you can help us keep that conversation going once we move to publish with something like this, because if it gets a lot of traction, then it's something that could easily be overinterpreted in a lot of ways.
Micah?
Hi. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's nice to see everybody. Good to see you, Chris. Are you still in Sweden?
Yeah, I'm still in Sweden, hiding out here in the countryside. So.
When you messaged me, I imagined you were in like a cabin in the woods, you know, completely in a bunker, basically.
Well, it's if you look outside, there's nothing but wild animals out there. Few people a few 100 meters away.
Well, you can hunt for sustenance if you need to.
Yeah, I could even do that. From time to time, you hear shots ring out, and that's when they're going after the foxes, and so it really is the countryside here.
Well, better that than a flat in Central Aarhus. So I'll try to keep this short. Everybody's probably pretty tired, but Andreas asked me to update you guys on the project that my lab's been working on. So I'll share my screen here. This is going to be a little disorganized. I threw some stuff in a slide. Oh, what's happening? Is it working? Oh, no, that just turned off my video. Sorry. Share screen. So, I mean, basically, about a week ago in the lab meeting, we talked about what we could do for some of our student projects where, you know, we have several BSc and MSc students in cognitive science who were planning to analyze our large-scale neuroimaging data this summer, and we're still in talks with the hospital to determine if any kind of brain imaging data collection will be possible this summer. But in the meantime, we wanted to do something, and we wanted to have some kind of project we could sink our teeth into. So very much led by my students Peter Wed and Melda Brandholt and Nana Kildau, we threw together a basic survey based on the instruments that we already had in our test battery for our ongoing Lundbeck-funded project on mental health and interoception. So we put together a pre-registered document pretty rapidly. We have it here. All of this is now on our OSF site, but it was really an amazing project because I think from last Monday to Friday, we put together like a 22-page document just outlining what the project is about. And I think it really kind of came out of my own or our own introspective experience that, you know, we go for daily walks, and after I go for the walk, I get super obsessed on my passages in my throat. Francesco takes my temperature twice a day. So it's like you get this kind of hypochondria that comes about from monitoring your own bodily symptoms. And we started to talk about, you know, well, we know that there's a very good, well-established link between interoception and symptom reporting and anxiety and uncertainty. So what if these things are going together? You know, what if some of the effects of social distancing on our subjective distress, on our mental and physical health might be related to this degree to which that we start to hyperfixate on the body. So we wanted to put something together that we could do. We wanted to do a survey, something that would go a little bit beyond the average style survey. So we put together a protocol that looks like this. So people come into the study. We have a red cap survey with a pretty involved informed consent process that we kind of rapidly vetted with people like Michael Bang-Peterson. We do a pre-post mental health battery. So they come in, they have session 1, which is on day 1. We sample them a total of 6 times spread over 72-hour intervals. So they get small email reminders to complete a very short experience sampling survey every 3 days. And then on the last day, we have the follow-up mental health measure. And we basically put instruments that we had kind of vetted ourselves in the past year for things like measuring depression, anxiety, intolerance of uncertainty, which is a well-known clinical instrument that is a kind of moderator variable of anxiety and depression. Intolerance of uncertainty asks you questions like, you know, I don't like when things don't go my way. Uncertainty stresses me out. So it's kind of getting on that situation of feeling like you don't have control over your immediate horizon. So we sample these. We sampled the daily experience sampling. For that, we put together a combination of kind of existing moods, like the PANAS short form. The PANAS is a very common clinical inventory that measures positive and negative affect. We often use it in our drug trials to see if the drug is altering mood in addition to the clinical effects. So we have there the daily PANAS, the daily short form of the STI, which is just about 5 questions. And then we developed a 12-item inventory, what we call multi-dimensional experience, fast scales, rating their sensations from their heart or pulse, sensations from the breathing, their stomach, their hunger and fullness, the bladder, need to defecate, fatigue, drowsiness, skin, headache, temperature. We kind of separate these into more specific bodily part sensations corresponding to the typical interoception literature, and more general and even symptom-related things like sensations from the throat and nose. So we could try to capture, you know, really this is not a measure of objective interoception. Some of you who've seen my talks know that we do a lot of work on psychophysics of interoception and trying to dissociate the subjective from the objective of interoceptive sensitivity. This is people's self-reported beliefs about what they're experiencing in their body. So it's very different. We also measured a well-known scale known as the Micah, the multidimensional interoceptive experience scale. So that is kind of a large scale. It's in the pre and post battery. It's about 37 questions. And one of the things we've done already, any data I show you here is kind of rolling data analysis. We can't release any data until the close of data collection 30 days from now because of the pre-registration. But I can show you kind of sneak peek. So we've done factor analysis on the Maya. We find that we recapitulate it has a published 8-factor structure. We get about 7 factors with one of the factors being combined. So you get kind of attention regulation, the degree to which your body distracts you, the degree to which you notice your body, the connection between your body and emotions, the degree to which you worry about the body, trust the body, and regulate and listen to the body. And one of the things that's kind of interesting is if we take our interoceptive experience sampling scale and we do kind of factor analysis on that, what we find are 3 main factors in the daily experience samples, and those break down essentially into clustering on symptoms related to COVID itself. So there's a cluster in the interoceptive experience samples that loads on things like pain and aching, temperature, my nasal passage and throat. That's what we call the COVID symptom factor. There's another factor that loads on sort of general somatic feelings. We call that the soma factor. So that loads more on feelings from my skin, my stomach, feeling of hunger or fullness. Very interesting preprint from Rebecca Sachs at MIT today, talking about, you know, increased hunger during self-isolation. We see some evidence of that. I was kind of confused by it first, but it does seem as if people are reporting increased awareness of sensations of hunger. So the second factor is loading mostly on these general things, and then the third factor loads very specifically on the cardiorespiratory sensations. And when we look at a correlation structure between the Maya, which is sort of the trait interoception, and the state interoception measured by the multidimensional interoceptive experience sampling, what we see, it's kind of hard to see, these are all thresholded at less than P001. What we see is basically that there's a kind of sensible construct validity. So the COVID factor, the degree to which people say that they're really sensing, you know, sensations related to COVID, is loading negatively on the, I know this is really hard to see, I'm sorry, is loading negatively on the not worrying. So basically the more you endorse items in the Maya scale that are consistent with worrying a lot about the body, the more likely you are to report that you have more intense sensations from your throat, nose, temperature, etc. Similarly, it loads positively on the what should really be called the distracting scale because of how we coded it. So the kind of nutshell there is what we see is that if you are low on trusting the body, low on high on being distracted by the body, and high on worrying about the body, you also report a lot of feeling of very strong feelings from those body parts. So that's kind of interesting, and it suggests that the multidimensional interoceptive experience sampling has some kind of face validity with the more trait-like beliefs. This is all self-report. I totally skipped over actually explaining what's in the study, so you'll have to excuse this brief look at REDCap. We have about 807 people respond, but we only have about 552 complete data sets right now, which is still really amazing for a survey we launched last Friday. We were worried because of the Twitter-heavy recruitment that we would have, you know, a Twitter sample of neuroscientists, basically. We don't see that, so the median age is younger. I'm really sorry for these ugly REDCap graphs, but basically we see that the median age in the sample is about 29, so it is a younger sample. Right now it's predominantly female, although there is about 30% males, self-identified gender. In terms of the residents, we're pretty happy. We have 212 Danes in there, so we're well representing, I think, Danes. But also surprisingly, we have a little smattering of many other countries in here with a kind of nice representation of Poland because of a friend who posted on some communities there. A nice suggestion from Peter was we don't just measure where they are, we measure their nationality in case somebody wants to look at what it's like to be an immigrant in a country as this is going on. As an immigrant in Denmark, I find it pretty stressful to basically have no idea what the government is saying from day to day. So that's kind of in there. In terms of English fluency level, we don't have the resources right now to translate this. We've had some offers, but we really were focusing on what we could do fast. So we only have the survey in English. All of our consent forms basically explicitly apologize to the subject for this. And we have that, the majority of the sample are saying that they have native or professional proficiency in English. And they're not mostly researchers, so most of the research, only 18% are saying they have a PhD or higher, 34 the master's degree, so almost half are saying high school or bachelor's equivalent. And also you see in the occupation, about 34% are students, but we have some in research, about 20%, public sector, education. We were hoping, one of our trainees, Melva, he's our PhD student, he's a doctor at Skyview right now. We designed a lot of questions in the questionnaire about, are you working in healthcare? Do you have proper protective gear? You know, these types of things. Unfortunately, we have very few healthcare workers because obviously they're literally fighting in the war right now, so they don't have time to answer surveys. But that's who's in the survey, and one of the things that's been kind of interesting is one of the first things we looked at is, you know, what are people actually worried about? We asked people to fill out different scales about how long they've been in social distancing. We asked them to make predictions about how long they'll be in social distancing. They predict how severely their economic situation will be impacted. They predict, and they give confidence ratings in these different predictions. So one of the things we see in the sample, which is obviously biased by these characteristics I've just told you, is that people are not that worried in our sample about personal health, maybe because it's a slightly young skewed sample. So I know these are horrible pie graphs from REDCap, I'm sorry. I mean, the amazing thing about all this, I was sitting in my underwear when Andreas reminded me to have the meeting, so I could just throw on a hat and be not in my underwear anymore and be ready for this. So that's beautiful for people with ADHD. But we have basically, I'm just going to tell you, I mean, basically what we see is that people are more worried about their economic status than they are their personal health in our sample. But kind of nicely, they're also more worried about the general state of society than they are their own personal health. So there's some nice pro-social factors there, I think. I don't have the data to show you on the predictions, but I think those are going to be, kind of close your eyes here. So on our expectations, just to show you what those data look like. I think those are going to be very important moderator variables, you know, measuring if people have extreme expectations, and if someone believes they're going to be in lockdown for 140 days versus 30 days, presumably that's going to exacerbate some of the mental health consequences. For example, this is how the day's expectation, the median is right around 30 days. There's kind of a band at 60 days, 90 days, and a few people out here who think they're going to be in lockdown for quite a long time. We measure how confident in this prediction they are. We ask about personal economic situation. We see here, I think, a slightly different story from the pie graph, right? Because you see that there's a good chunk of people who don't expect almost any consequences economically. And then there's another chunk of people who really do expect severe economic consequences. And I think delving into that expectation is going to be important. So in terms of the, you know, we don't really have results yet, but what we do have is kind of, you know, this multidimensional interoceptive experience sampling is something new to us. We wanted to see if it could work. It seems interesting. We see kind of interesting factors here. This is an Epiglasso network analysis that I did in R. So there's a lot of caveats here. You should be very careful about interpreting the different weights you see in the graph. But what you see, the clusters here are from the PANAS short form. So you have a positive mood cluster. Let's see if I get this right. Yeah, so you have this is in green, you have the negative affect cluster, and in yellow, you have the positive affect cluster. Obviously, you see the factor dimension there, just the positive negative affect dimension. And then over here, you have our interoceptive symptoms interoceptive awareness scales split into the general scales and the specific scales. And something that we see in the data is, I know it's really hard to read this thing, but if you look, for example, ES6F, this node right here is nervous. This one is ES6J is active. Down here, ESD is ashamed. ES6E is inspired. What we've seen is often the ones on this adjacency here are basically tying into the negative affect, and those are tying again into the interoceptive symptoms consistent with COVID, like temperature and headache. So one of the things we're seeing in the data is what looks like a factor where the more attention you allocate to your body, the kind of potentially more disruptive emotionally this is. I've been talking to Michael. We have his government trust measure there. I don't want to show the data because it's too preliminary, but we even see glimmers of what looks like the more you trust the government, the less you rely on interoception, which would be a kind of a story like, if you're really at home, you have a lot of expected uncertainty, you're predicting the worst, you might try to deal with that uncertainty by attending to the body and becoming, kind of hyper vigilant about what's happening. Whereas if you're a bit more relaxed, you may not do that. And I think what we're going to see in the data is that this interoceptive hypertension is not a pro-health factor. It's probably not a great strategy to obsess over your physical health. Now, what do we see about that? We measured two very well-validated clinical inventories. So unfortunately, we have something called the PHQ-9, the Patient Health Questionnaire. It's a depression inventory. This is what the sample looked like as of yesterday. So you see it's an inventory with clinical cutoffs. If you're above 10, it's considered moderate. So this is where clinical judgment may become necessary. Above 15 becomes moderate and severe depression. We see that overall, we're under 10 for the median of the sample, but there's a substantial number of people above that score who are endorsing clinically significant depression. And then the thing that really opened our eyes yesterday is when we look at, so the participants' subjective ratings of how much is social distancing impacting their personal mental health or their physical health, what we see is a highly significant association between the PHQ-9 scores and the impact of social distancing. So what we see is that people who are telling us, and I think it's important to have the caveats here, is that this is purely self-report data, but people who are telling us that they're really mentally impacted by the social distancing are also having very high scores on the depression inventory, even going above, I'm sorry, I didn't need to drag that, going above the moderate and severe depression level. And when we look at anxiety scales, now this is very important, this is state anxiety. This is the STAI short form 7-item questionnaire, so it's not trait anxiety. We see an even stronger relationship with the same factors. These also hold for the physical well-being, so people also say that the more their physical well-being is impacted, the worse these variables, but the strongest associations are for these. So we think that that's really important. I was in my underwear looking at the expected uncertainty variable this morning. So this is the inventory, which has a lot of transdiagnostic validity. There's a lot of anxiety and depression studies showing that the more your intolerance of uncertainty, the worse your symptom severity. So we've tried to do some basic bootstrap mediation analysis where we have our subjective scales of the impact on mental and physical social distancing, predicting expected uncertainty, and then the outcome variable being either the depression or the anxiety scores. And we do see some partial mediation. There's a lot of problems there with mediation. We don't have an intervention design yet, but this is just like early glimpse. But it does seem as if some of the severity of the social distancing impact on the mental health symptoms depends on intolerance of uncertainty. Now, the really valuable thing about this data set, I think, is going to be the repeated measures. We're really hoping, we had about a 40% dropout rate on the baseline measure, but we're hoping that the people who completed this voluntary survey will be a little bit more motivated. We do see our first samples coming in with a lesser dropout rate on experience sample 1. 16 days from now, if even we maintain a 50% dropout rate, we're going to be looking at 200 repeated measures, which is going to allow us to do things like latent growth curve analysis of how these interoceptive factors and mood factors evolve over time. So we really want to look at those growth curves and see, you know, is there a kind of initial spike as you go into lockdown that you become hypervigilant of interoception, and then does that we're working with Rajit Kiviet at Cambridge, who's an expert in those models. Now, where do we want to go from here? I'm on the phone today with Lundbeck Fonden. We're preparing a kind of emergency grant application to their immediate kind of call. Something that we're probably going to do as part of CFIN. And it's going to have a two-part project part. I think you won't be surprised to hear that the first part is we want to immediately scale up our experience sampling study. So we want to immediately scale up as fast as possible to the Danish population, a kind of more mobile phone, beeper-based study of our short form questionnaires. So just the body questionnaires and the symptom questionnaires, where we can potentially, as you've heard from other people, do a kind of anonymized daily reporting so that officials can track, you know, the day-to-day or semi-daily changes in these factors. That's the kind of immediate thing that we can do potentially by next week. Lundbeck, if they like the idea, will turn the grant around within 48 hours. So we will know by Friday on that. The other thing we are really quite into, you know, my group studies respiration in the brain. We have a PhD student studying respiration in the brain, and we've been tracking very closely the case reports that suggest, we have now seen several different neurological case reports that suggest that in severe sufferers, that is people who become intubated from the disease, it looks as if COVID-19 is actually attacking the respiratory medulla of the brainstem. So we've seen several reports of autoimmune engendered encephalitis. That is, it seems as if once you get to the stage of intubation, the immune system starts to literally attack the brain, causes seizures, causes these types of things. And there's evidence that even people who recover from this level of severity have potentially lifelong respiratory distress and a disruption of the brainstem nuclei who are controlling respiration. So what we're thinking is a kind of two-part work package, one in which we do daily experience sampling, including, of course, respiratory symptoms, and the other where we try to roll out a brain imaging study where, for example, we have protocols already in place through our collaboration with the Danish Pain Research Center to do high-resolution brainstem scanning, to do quantitative imaging of so-called in vivo histology using multi-parameter mapping. And we have, in collaboration with Olivia Fall and Klaus Stefan, developed a respiratory awareness task that we can actually use outside the scanner. So what we're thinking as we kind of rapidly protocol this is something like a 3-month and 12-month follow-up study where we measure respiratory impairment in the behavioral level, and we measure basic brainstem histology and function, and structure, and then we repeat that at the 12-month mark to try to actually determine, you know, how long lasting for survivors of COVID are the respiratory disruptions, and do we actually see long-lasting neurohistological damage as a result? So that's something that we're really think is going to be a big deal. We've been talking to Ravi Menon, we've been talking to Ed Bullmore. There's a kind of growing consensus that there's something neuroimagers can do here, and I think it's going to be about breathing in the brain. The final thing I want to say, which is really something I could even talk to Chris about later, I think this would be very interesting, potentially as a collaboration there. We've been working with Toby Wise already on his uncertainty learning video game. So he's got, if I actually play this, it's really cool. How do I have to do slideshow, current slide, play. Oh, no, that's why everything is bad. Okay. It doesn't want to play. This is a little video game that he's made. It's like Space Invaders. Sorry guys, it's like me being old. What's going on? Slideshow from current slide. Yes. Play. Okay, you can see this now. So you see it's a little video game that you play. He's done several studies now that are pre-printed with the Max Planck Center for Computational Psychiatry. It takes like 10 minutes. You learn over time the probability mass of where these asteroids are coming. And it's a kind of intolerance of uncertainty measure itself. So he sees that it's like the Flappy Birds game. As you play the game, you get more and more points, but if you hit a rock, you lose all the points. And this actually increases subjective anxiety for people in a kind of moderate way, at least compared to, for example, existing affective bias tasks. And we already have plans to include this measure in our visceral mind cohort, and we're thinking as part of the Breathe grant, we can basically host this in an anonymous way and probably have people taking semi-daily or weekly. It's a kind of fun video game. He says many people take it daily. So we're thinking we can roll this out and actually include a computational measure. You know, this can be fit with sort of standard dynamic reinforcement learning models. So we can also have some element in the grant of tracking how the subjective anxiety symptoms might relate to increased computational parameterization of uncertainty during learning. So that's kind of where we're going with this. We have to move very, very quickly, but that is it. Yeah.
Wow. Super cool.
How do I stop sharing my screen?
We have, I mean, there's potentially a lot of questions for Micah, but I suggest that just before we take those questions and open that discussion, let's maybe just have Christine also present her latest project that's coming online, and then let's do the questions together, because otherwise, you know, it will be going on for a long time. So Christine, please tell about your new idea.
Thanks, Andreas. I'm working as part of a team with King's College. The project is called the RAMP project, which is Repeated Assessment of Mental and Physical Health. And we've gone a slightly different direction because one of the great things about King's is that they have these really, really large cohorts that they've been studying in relation to eating disorders, depression, anxiety, and the NIH bioresource cohort, which is 120,000 people. So we've got cohorts that we've got ethics to link to, and we're going to use multiple assessments, a bit like what Micah was talking about with standardized instruments, and we'll be repeating those assessments every 2 weeks. We have ethics to follow people until the social distancing measures are stopped, and then 6 months after that. So we're planning a fairly long-term study to look at the kind of consequences for people who have existing mental health conditions and also people who have physical health conditions. So we are hoping to launch at the end of the week, and all the survey instruments and everything that we've compiled will be on OSF. And hopefully we'll have a lot of the same principles that Andreas Lieberoth spoke about, with trying to make materials as open and shareable right away. But we have a big social media campaign launching at the weekend, and hopefully I'll have more to update you on then after that.
Great, amazing. So 2 projects that are diving into the mental health aspect in different ways. I mean, it's really impressive that there are still people here now after almost 2.5 hours on screen online. So let's just do the last questions for Micah and Christine before we can break for lunch or whatever. Any suggestions or questions?
Silence.
Andreas?
Yeah, it seems that since we're all doing different stuff, it's going to be really tricky to kind of cross-coordinate between the different data sets. But if there's anything that anyone needs, and if our scale keeps kind of the growth curve that it has set so far, we actually have made a provision in the pre-registration to add conditional items temporarily to particular groups. So for instance, if we're interested in, let's say, people working in health professions, we can actually add specific items that will go out to only them. So if there's something that we need to get at for like a brief specific sample of some kind that might not fit in any of the other things that's going on, we can actually add a little bit to our survey and then take it out once the power that is needed is reached. So that's just to offer that if any of the rest of you want to find correlations, for instance, with the measures that we have to something that you're also measuring in your survey, we could actually do something like that.
On a very practical level, maybe if we could get the links, Christine, from your studies and from Andreas and from Micah's study, we can let's also try to get it all up on the website to get an idea about these different surveys that are ongoing, and we can do what we can to share them on social media. So Christine, in your case, did you need any national funding as well, or what's the situation like there? You're muted, Christine. You're muted.
I'm so sorry. I was going to be that person. We have funding through King's College, have redirected funding to this bigger study. So we're probably going to look for, we've got support from one of the big mental health charities to run the social media campaign, and from some of the other genetic cohorts have redirected some of their initial funding back into this. So we're very much just focused on getting really, really good quality data in one context.
So we know in the Danish context, the Danish Research Council has just announced another call for COVID-related research. And it seems whereas the first move was very much about, doing something immediate about the virus, people are discovering all the syndemic effects, so all the other things that it does. And I would not be surprised if that would be a target for the second round. We just know that the funding has been set aside. I haven't seen the call yet, but I'm sure it will be available very soon. And then there's, of course, the Lundbeck Foundation and the Novo Foundation, which you probably already looked at. Andreas Lieberoth?
Yeah, we actually have no money at all. So at some point, that might be something that we need to do to kind of just create an infrastructure that can carry what we've built so far.
I know that the Aarhus University's Research Fund has also been discussing to set aside some funding for these issues here. I don't think they've made a decision. They've been relatively slow in the process. Other foundations have been faster, most notably Carlsberg and then Novo and then Lundbeck. But I mean, I would definitely prepare ideas so you have something ready to submit. It seems that most foundations are figuring out ways to do a very fast turnover. Once a call is open, like 48 hours for Micah's project, we had less than 24 hours from the first invite till we had the funding opening up. So these things, there is a sense of urgency, and they have been impressively good at addressing that. So with these words, maybe it's time to call it a day for now. Thanks for staying on and staying on. It's really incredible to see the amount of energy and ideas that are coming on. Remember the breakfast Thursday at 9:30 and the writing cafe on Friday. Next week, I think most of university is officially closing down. Chris, do you want to say something?
Oh, unmute.
Sorry. I just wanted to quickly ask Micah, this is fascinating, but now we're running out of time. Do you have time later this afternoon, maybe?
Absolutely. We could take a breakout session this afternoon.
4:45, does that work for you?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, so see you at 4:45 this afternoon.
Let's do that. That sounds great.
Okay, so let's call it a day for now. Remember this, next week the university is closing down. Nothing will happen, even more down than it is now, even online closing down, and most people are thrown on vacation. So no IMC seminar on Tuesday. Chris is scheduled to have the IMC seminar after Easter. It's very unlikely that we can meet physically, but Chris and I are meeting tomorrow and we'll discuss whether we can do an online version or something else instead. So keep updated on that. And other than that, then just thanks a lot and stay safe and take care out there, all of you. We'll be in touch soon. Bye.
Bye. Could you like Hollywood Squares and dance off?